Hello my beautiful friends, welcome back to Studio Rapour. In today's tutorial I'm going to show you how I made this 20-ounce lager tumbler. This was definitely a challenge for me. I've never done the 3D drip before and there's really no clear instructions on how to do that. So it's all kind of figure it out as you go along, which is definitely what happened here. But I absolutely love the way that it turned out. We did use alcohol inks, epoxy, and then a thickening medium to do the drips up top. I will leave everything that I used down in the description box below. I think that this was a perfect Father's Day gift, which was the reason I wanted to create this. I wanted to give it to my fiance from our son for Father's Day. It says surviving fatherhood, one beer at a time on it, which is perfect. Our son is 22 months old and he is wild. So there are many beers had in this household, so I thought it would be the perfect gift. So without further ado, I will stop rambling and we will jump into the tutorial. This is a 20-ounce lager tumbler from Craft Haven. Whenever I start a new project, I always take the lid for the tumbler and I put it in the box that it came in, and then I write on top of the box either who it's for or what the project is that I'm working on. This way it all stays together and nothing is ever misplaced. I go around the whole cup with a sanding block to prep the cup. I do this with every cup that I make. I want to make sure that I scratch off that whatever it is on top of the cup, the sealant that they put on. I go around the rim, the base of the cup to make sure that everything that I apply going forward is going to adhere to the cup really well. Once I'm happy with everything coming off of the cup, you will see my hands are silver from the material. I'm going to go ahead and first wash my hands to get all of that off, but then take a mild dish detergent. I use Norwex and I give the cup a really good clean, wash it, dry it, and then we are ready for the next step. For this style tumbler, you just need to use any white spray paint for the base of the cup. Because we are using alcohol inks, it is very important that you really take your time with this step. Get nice even coats of spray paint onto the cup. If there are any drips because there's too much applied, you will be able to see it under the alcohol inks, and then you're going to have to either sand it and start over. It just won't look right. This did take a couple coats of spray paint to make sure that everything was good and covered and ensuring that I didn't have any drips on the cup. Once you're happy with the coverage of the white spray paint on the tumbler, go ahead and let it dry really well before we move on to the alcohol inks. The alcohol inks that I'm using are by the company Ranger. This first color is Dijon and that's like a brownish yellow. Dandelion is the brightest yellow, and then Lemonade is the lightest yellow. That's what I'm going to be starting off with my first layer. And then the sponge that I use, I think I got these from the dollar store, and I just cut them up in like 6 different pieces. This one I have already used for the original cup, right or wrong. And this part is really, I just from doing one play around with it, kind of found what works for me. So my thought process was to use the lightest color first, which is Lemonade, and just get a good base layer on the whole cup. I will, though, leave at least the first inch of the cup by the rim, like where the mouthpiece goes. I leave that white. I don't put any alcohol inks up there because on the first one that I did, the white foam, like the 3D epoxy, was really thin at the top and you could still see yellow through it, and I don't want that to happen again. So I don't know if I didn't use enough paint or pigment in that first part, but I figure I have really nice coverage with the spray paint. It'll just be easier to do it that way. So as I go along, if you've never worked with alcohol inks before, they do dry really quickly. My camera isn't so you kind of have to work fast to get the desired look that you want. But I know I'm going to don't forget the bottom of your cup either. Again, that was just to get a base layer down. That's like one of my biggest pet peeves. The next color I am going to use is Dandelion finish. I never leave them stainless. Like I was saying before, as it drips, if you allow it to, it will And then
pull that
once
color
you
underneath
go
it as
around,
well. So
and
again,
I get
you have to work fast first,
but
layer
you can keep layering as much as you want.
then you
until
can
you're
start
happy.
mixing the other ones in with it. Now, as they drip, if there is another color underneath it, it's going to pull that color away. So again, you just kind of have to work fast with this. You can keep layering, you can keep fixing it. It's not an issue. It just may take a little bit longer. Here is the second layer of dandelion over lemonade, and I'm happy with how that looks. It's beginning to look more like beer. So now I'm going to go in with
is
the third
probably
color,
one of the most
Dijon
important
colors.
This
Before
again is
adding
like
this,
a
the cup
brownish
is way too
yellow.
bright yellow. So this really helps tone it down a little bit. It really gives it more depth and dimension and just changes the overall look. And even if you were going for a darker color beer, I would just add more of this to the cup. It really transforms the whole look. So after I'm happy with the layer of Dijon, I'm gonna go ahead and keep layering any colors that I think are necessary with the other two again. And this is definitely the longest working part of the project, but it's the most important. So just take your time with it. If you are just adding and adding and adding, sometimes walking away, just go do something for a half hour, come back and take another look at it, because it's really hard. You kind of get wrapped up in it. I think if you remove yourself for a minute and you come back to it, you'll be pleasantly surprised with where you're at. So that would be my advice, and then you can move on to the next step. Once you're happy with how the cup looks and you are done layering, I usually let mine dry for about a half hour before I seal it with Quick Coat. This is from Counterculture DIY. I love all of their products. This I use to seal my projects. So it is not epoxy, it is a urethane sealer. And I place it in this little like dropper bottle just because it's easier to apply this way. And I just go ahead and go around the whole cup with a little silicone brush that helps apply nice even coats of it. And I do this whenever I need to seal alcohol inks or on top of vinyl as well before I start epoxy, just to make sure that nothing moves. You could probably use Rust-Oleum's 2x clear coat as well for this. Since I started using Quick Coat, I really like the results that I get. I've never had an issue with anything moving underneath it. Once the Quick Coat has been applied to the whole tumbler and there's no streaks, I'm going to let it dry for about 45 minutes to an hour before I go into my first coat of epoxy. Now we are good and ready to start our first layer of epoxy. I mixed up 20 ounces of Counterculture DIY's Artist Resin. I only used 20 ounces because there is no glitter on this cup. It's already a smooth surface and it worked out just fine. I have been using Counterculture since I started doing tumblers, and I've always loved their epoxy. I've never found a reason to switch, but I am curious to know what everyone's go-to epoxy is. I know that there's a ton of them out there, so if there's another brand that you absolutely love, it's your ride or die,
leave it in the comments down below because I would love to hear what everyone else really likes using. So once I get a nice smooth finish of epoxy, or I guess coating of epoxy on the cup, I go ahead and torch it like usual just to make sure that there are no micro bubbles. Not that there should be any, but again, because there's no glitter and it's just alcohol inks, it will be really easy to see those on the cup. When applying decals to a tumbler, I always let that coat of epoxy dry in turn for at least 12 hours. I don't want any issues when trying to put the decal on, so I let it go for at least 12 hours, if not longer, depending on what my day looks like. The decal I'm using says Surviving Fatherhood, 1 beer at a time. It's just something I put together on Cricut Design Space. I usually leave, I'll usually use the hinge method when applying decals like this. However, because the cup is curved a little bit and not just a skinnier plump, I find it easier to just take it off and stick it on there. It's definitely a little bit more ballsy doing it this way because once it sticks, it's on there. But when you're working with something that's curved like this, I find that cutting the transfer tape, which I'll do in a second, really helps the placement of where the word needs to go. Otherwise, they will wind up they won't stay in a straight direction. It'll wind up going up or down depending on the cup. So if you take your scissors and just give little snips where you need a little bit more flexibility with the transfer tape, this will make a world of a difference when you are applying your vinyl decal. Again, if you were using a plump or skinny tumbler, you don't necessarily have to do this. And that's when I would use the hinge method. But for this, it just works out much better. I would also like to point out my very high-tech advanced cup placement device that I have here. This literally, I bought a pool noodle from the dollar store and used like really thick painter's tape to hold them together. The painter's tape is barely even staying onto the pool noodles, but it makes a world of difference to hold your cup in place when you're applying any sort of decals to your tumbler. I'm now going to use the CC DIY urethane sealer again to seal in my vinyl really well before going into another coat of epoxy. I let that coat of epoxy dry for about 12 to 18 hours. It did not need another coat after that. It was totally smooth. I'm now taking a very sharp craft knife and going around the rim of the cup to make sure that any epoxy that may have spilled over is being cut away and the rim is super smooth to the touch. I will then take some acetone on a piece of paper towel and give the inside of the cup a good cleaning as well. There's always a little bit of spray paint that goes in there, so I want to make sure all of that is out before I move on to the next step. I would also like to acknowledge that yes, I am wearing a dinosaur shirt. I have a 2-year-old, and that's what you do when you have a 2-year-old. So yes, I rock dinosaur shirts. This part in this cup making process has definitely been the most challenging because I don't feel like there's ever clear instructions on how to do this. So I apologize if mine aren't very specific either. I mixed up 20 milliliters of epoxy and then I added in CC DIY's Nice and Thick. It is a thickening agent. And I don't even know how much I used, honestly. I mean, it was definitely probably a teaspoon. May have been more, I don't know. But I mixed it in really good to the epoxy. After that was all mixed up really well, you need a very thick consistency. So and then I added white paint to it as well, just to make sure, obviously you need color in there, so, or lack thereof. But you still need to let this sit for, I want to say it sat for like 30 to 45 minutes to really get thick. Was this too thick? Probably, because it was very stringy and very, very challenging to work with. So I did wind up doing another cup after that, and I didn't use the nice and thick. And honestly, I feel like you had to let the epoxy sit a little bit longer, but I don't know. Maybe I just put too much in. Again, there's no clear instructions. Like, it doesn't say, you know, add so much of the nice and thick per, you know, how many milliliters of epoxy that you're using. So I think it's just a learning curve. Honestly, I take a very small, not a craft knife, like a wooden stick, and you just kind of want to spread it on like you would buttercream to a cake, and making sure, do a little bit at a time, just because you can always add more. It's a lot more difficult to take away. And just like that, you keep applying and layering until you get a nice consistency. You want to make sure that you're taking that all the way to the rim of the cup. You want to make sure that the rim is nice and coated as well, so that it's not like missing in a place or a part. This part of the project, again, I also will say that you need a good 2 hours to be able to watch the stuff that you're using. So between mixing this stringy mess, taffy looking epoxy for the 3D portion, you need to make sure you can watch it while it's thickening, but then also as you're letting it drip down the tumbler, because you need to be able to move it one direction to another. It needs to be standing upright and then upside down, and you want to make sure that you have control over it. So that's the one thing I will say about this cup, is it definitely needs your attention. You can see here I smartened up and put gloves on like I should have had on in the first place. Always wear gloves when working with epoxy. If you've ever had epoxy on your hands before, you know how difficult it is to get it off. So I just continue to add more of this 3D foam effect until I'm happy with how much I have on there. Now also be aware that it's going to move. As thick as this was, it is going to move quite a bit. So just again, be careful with how much you're putting on, especially in front of the vinyl decal that you have, because that you don't want it to run over it unless you're purposely trying to do that. But in this case, I was not. So you want to make sure that it's all evened out where you want it to be, and then you just let it do its thing. And I totally forgot to film that portion of it. I could kick myself, but I don't know what I was doing. I probably had the baby home with me, so doing 12 other things at once while he was napping. But yeah, so you just kind of let it drip and do its thing and keep checking it. You're probably going to wind up having it sit normal on a table, and then flip it upside down to let it kind of retract back a little bit if it's moving a little bit too much. Besides cleaning up the cup, this is the last step in the process. So you want to make sure that all the white spray paint is totally covered with the foam, and that's it. I hope you guys really enjoyed this tutorial. I really enjoyed making these tumblers. This one here is the very first one I did, which is why you can still see yellow up top. I totally failed and did not take a video or picture of the one I actually worked on for this video. So I hope you guys really liked it. If you did, please give this video a thumbs up. It really helps support my channel. And if you have not subscribed, please do so. I would absolutely love to have you as part of my YouTube family. If you have any suggestions or recommendations on other tutorials you'd like to see, leave them in the comments down below. I hope you guys all have an amazing day, and we will see you next time. Bye.